Okay, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Welcome to our discussion about sexual violence as a weapon in Russia's war against Ukraine. My name is Olesya Khromeychuk. I'm the director of the Ukrainian Institute London, and we're really grateful that you decided to come and participate in this really important discussion today. When we talk about wars, we so often focus on the front line and on the military, and it's very easy to forget what happens to civilians, and also specifically women in particular. And women do get disproportionately affected by wars. Most of them are civilians. They don't necessarily belong to some structures like the military that can offer a form of protection. They become often sole carers of dependents, children, the elderly, and they often suffer from destitution. They find themselves in situations when they have to leave the country. They could be subjected to potential threats of trafficking, but also violence, and of course violence from enemy men and conflict-related sexual violence. So we'll be talking about quite a lot of these issues today with the panel of speakers. I'll introduce them in a minute. And of course, we'll be talking about conflict-related sexual violence that's been perpetrated in Ukraine since the start of the war in 2014, and not just February 2022. So we're really pleased to be one of the co-organizers of this discussion. The event is co-organized by Ukrainian Institute London, together with Birkbeck, University of London, and in particular Molly Flynn. I want to thank you for hosting us here today at Birkbeck. Also SEMA Ukraine, International Council of Polish Women Plus, and Cambridge Families for Ukraine. And also this event is part of SEMA Ukraine's advocacy tour across major European capitals, London, Paris, and Brussels. And the trip includes a variety of events and conferences and meetings with politicians and decision makers, as well as public engagement. And this is the first of the variety of meetings that our speakers are going to have. I'm going to introduce all of our speakers immediately, right away, and then we'll hear from each of them separately. So I'll begin with Apolline Pierson, who's a program manager at National Survivors Network. After writing her master's thesis on the access to reparations for victims of sexual violence in the Democratic Republic of Congo, Apolline started her career in the humanitarian sector, focusing on the issues of conflict-related sexual violence. And she spent some years in the field in Africa. After kickstarting the work of National Survivors Network in the Democratic Republic of Congo and Central African Republic, she now works as a program manager in charge of the Mukwege Foundation projects, the projects that are linked to movement building and amplifying the voices of survivors across the world. And the next speaker will be Anna Kvit, who's a visiting research fellow at UCL, European and International Social Studies Department. Her research experience covers empirical studies of women in the military in Ukraine, including the Invisible Battalion. I really hope that Anna will talk about that project at some length. Veterans' integration into civilian life and gendered impact of the war in Ukraine. She participated in the development of programs and policies on implementation of women, peace and security agenda in Ukraine. The next speaker is Iryna Dovhan, who was born in Donetsk Oblast. She graduated from Donetsk University. She worked as an economist, accountant, design engineer, and as a cosmetologist, owning her own beauty salon. As a result of her work supporting the Ukrainian army, Iryna was arrested and detained in 2014. She suffered serious forms of abuse, and she was forced to leave her hometown following her release with her family. Iryna is currently based in Kyiv, and she's still working to support Ukrainian prisoners of war. Since November 2018, she has been working as the international coordinator in the global network of victims and survivors to end wartime sexual violence. And she's representing Ukraine. Since February 2019, Iryna has been leading the Ukrainian Survivor Network, SEMA Ukraine. And today, she is also one of the board members of the Global Survivors Fund. And last but not least, Alisa Kovalenko, who's a Ukrainian director. She lives in Kyiv. She graduated from the Karpenko-Karye University of Cinema of Kyiv. She also studied at the Andrzej Wajda Cinema School in Warsaw. And after her first feature-length documentary, Sister Zo, Alisa directed her debut feature documentary, Alisa in Warland, about the war in eastern Ukraine. Alisa's second documentary, Home Games, that you might have seen at one of our film festivals a couple of years ago, won numerous awards. It was nominated for the Best Ukrainian Documentary in 2019 at the Ukrainian Film Academy. Alisa was working on a film on the war in Ukraine in 2014 when she was stopped at a checkpoint by the Russian proxies, and she was taken away for questioning and by the Russian officer. And I'm sure Alisa will tell us more about that herself. And she promised herself that if there's a full-scale invasion of Ukraine, then she will put down her camera and join the military instead. And that would be the way that she would participate in the protection of her country. And that's exactly what she did after the full-scale invasion on the 24th of February. So we'll hear about those experiences. And I also want to welcome Marina Mikhailova, a wonderful interpreter here today, who will be helping Iryna Dovhan throughout the discussion. So welcome, wonderful panel. There's so many of you, so many wonderful insights to hear, so many important information to receive and to discuss. Let's begin with you, Apolline, so you could give us a larger context about why we're gathering today.
Thank you. So I think we all heard about the horrific accounts of sexual violence that took place in Ukraine since the full-fledged invasion in February. We heard about women and girls in Bucha who were gang raped with extreme violence, sometimes before being killed or forcibly impregnated. These are just the one we heard about, and it is safe to infer that there are many, many other victims out there. Yet, as of today, less than 100 victims formally reported what they had suffered since February, fearing to speak out. We believe that survivors are experts in their own rights, that by having survived sexual violence and experienced the difficulties to accessing care, they know better than anyone what they need, and so we want to amplify their voices. It's in this capacity that the Mukwege Foundation started supporting SEMA Ukraine in 2019. SEMA Ukraine, as Olesya already mentioned, is a network composed of approximately 20 activists who survived sexual violence in Ukraine while being illegally detained by Russian and pro-Russian forces in the eastern part of the country since 2014. This is an important reminder for all of us that while most of the Western world only started paying attention to the Ukrainian conflict since February this year, the conflict started much before and already had its toll on Ukrainian women's bodies. After the full-fledged invasion this year, the Ukrainian government turned to Dr. Mukwege to share its expertise in providing survivor-centered, quality, holistic care to victims based on the Ponzi hospital model. This model allows survivors to access medical and psychological assistance, as well as legal and livelihood support within one central location. Alongside our sister organizations, the Global Survivor Fund, we have signed a Memorandum of Understanding with the Office of the Vice Prime Minister for European and Euro-Atlantic Integration and the Government Commissioner for Gender Policy in Ukraine. And we are now working very closely with survivors and the Ukrainian authorities to improve the quality of holistic care available to victims and implement timely reparations so that survivors feel comfortable coming forward and receiving the assistance they need to rebuild their lives. Today we are here with two members of SEMA Ukraine. This event, hosted by the Ukrainian Institute London, is the first step of an almost 2 weeks advocacy tour, as we mentioned, where they will voice the needs of Ukrainian survivors and try to garner support. Please join me in welcoming them in London today.
Anya, I'll turn to you now to give us a wider context about the situation in Ukraine. Again, we'll be coming back to 2014, I think, quite a lot. What has changed, what the key challenges are at the moment, and how they've changed since February. Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, thanks. Good afternoon, everybody. Yeah, I will talk in my part of this event today more about what you, Olesya, just asked, and about our understanding and knowledge of conflict-related sexual violence in Ukraine in particular. So last 9 years of the Russia's war against Ukraine, they caused lots of losses and damage. And when we hear about the consequences of the ongoing war in Ukraine, we hear about like heartbreaking statistics about thousands of people killed and millions of displaced people. We hear about massive destruction of the infrastructure and power cuts. People are living without heating, without food, without water, without electricity, and it's winter season, so it's inhuman conditions. But violence during the war, it happens on many different levels. And some of them are less visible, but are not less damaging. And conflict-related sexual violence is one of this type of crimes. And conflict-related sexual violence, it's an official term when we talk about it. By this term, we mean many different acts of violence, such as rape, castration, forced pregnancy, forced abortion, sexual slavery, forced prostitution, forced stripping, and many other acts of sexual violence. And they are committed against women and against men, and regardless their age. So children and elderly people are also victims of conflict-related sexual violence, but the majority of them are women, and this is the case of Ukraine. And for hundreds of years, this crime was regarded as something that just happens during the war. It's maybe misconduct of some military people, or nature of a soldier, of a man. And only in 2008, UN Security Council recognized that sexual violence can be used as a weapon and tactics of war. And from the reports from Ukraine and from the comments of Ukrainian lawyers and international lawyers and criminologists, we can say that there are all reasons to say that Russian military, Russian army is using sexual violence as the weapon of war. Because CRSV, which is conflict-related sexual violence, at the moment is used as a mean of torture in Ukraine. It is used as an act of genocide through forced pregnancy, abortion, and castration. It is used to terrorize local population, and it is used to impose power over the local population of the occupied territories. And it is used to impact certain people because of their work, their role, their status, their opinion, their behavior. And because of this, community leaders and activists and military people and veterans and their families, they tend to be more exposed to different violence, including conflict-related sexual violence. And it means that humans' bodies, and mainly women's bodies, are becoming battlefields, and that they are used to achieve political and territorial aims and gains by the price of their lives and their dignity and their health. And yet, despite the outrageous character of these crimes, we know not much about it. And the question is why? There are many reasons for that. I will name several. First of all, because these crimes are largely invisible. Men and women rarely report them. Not only because it's a traumatic experience, but also because survivors of conflict-related sexual violence, they are stigmatized, in all societies, in Ukrainian as well, with maybe different extent, but it happens because for some reason society has more critical comments and questions to those who survive the violence, but not to perpetrators, which is an act of violence itself already. Another reason would be that these crimes are invisible because many victims do not survive them. And this is what we hear from Ukraine now. We hear more and more stories about women being raped for hours till death, or men being tortured till death, and the torture included acts of sexual violence against them. And the crime is receiving less attention also because violence against women is a structural problem. And the culture of discrimination of women, of treating them as less valuable, less important, like lower quality of people, and culture of not intervening into the so-called private realm, not intervening into the conflicts between husband and wife, or men and women, parents and children, and the impunity for violence against women, it contributes to proliferation of conflict-related sexual violence, which means that if violence was a norm during the peaceful life, with more chances people will commit violence, including sexual violence, during the war. And one of the most popular questions I hear in the context of conflict-related sexual violence in Ukraine is how many cases are reported? What is the extent of this problem? And it's a very logical question, very rational question, but also it's a bit devastating for me because it always feels as if I need to show, like, to prove that there are many cases like this for them to be recognized as a problem or for them to be addressed, which is totally unfair. And the reality is that we don't know how many cases were committed, how many acts of sexual violence related to conflict were committed in Ukraine. I have some statistics, and you will understand how difficult it is to realize the extent of this problem. For example, since February 2022, UN agencies officially registered 124 cases of serious abuse. I must remind you that the war started in 2014, and there were cases of conflict-related sexual violence before that. UN, the Ukrainian government, and civil society in Ukraine, they all agree that 124 is not the actual number. The reality is hundreds times, like the numbers are hundreds of times higher, but we don't know how many. As of the end of October, according to the data of the Ministry of Internal Affairs of Ukraine, 43 cases were opened based on the facts of sexual violence committed by Russian servicemen. At the same time, during only March and May of 2022, so it's only 3 months, there were 14,300 criminal proceedings open under the article of the Criminal Code of Ukraine, violation of laws and customs of war. And we know that now usually cases of serious V are registered under this article. It's violation of the rules of law, but not sexual violence or rape. So we unfortunately don't know how many cases are there. And then another popular question is, what can we do about this? Which is also very logical, and I'm sure we will talk about it today in more detail. But from the name of this crime, we know part of the answer. It's a conflict-related sexual violence, and majority of cases of conflict-related sexual violence in Ukraine are caused by Russian military, and not having Russian military in the territory of Ukraine will solve part of this problem. But also we need to act at the policy level and at the level of the service provision, and at the level of we need to reconsider our cultural norms. And talking about the policies, it is very important to seek justice and avoid impunity, and for this we need changes to the criminal code of Ukraine, and we need proper coordination between service providers and investigators, because at the moment it's problematic. And also we need a mechanism for paying reparations to CRC survivors, and by this I mean that we need to establish it from scratch. There's nothing at the moment there. And then services for survivors, it's another very big topic, which means that we need to have these services. Some of them must be improved, some of them must be created from scratch again. They must be available, they must be accessible, and they must be effective, they must be of good quality. And it is also important to raise awareness about CRSV among defense and security sector representatives. And then at the cultural level, I would like to say that it is very important to revise our attitudes towards the survivors and towards perpetrators, because at the moment it is important to recognize these cases. It is important to talk about it, not to be silent about it, but it's crucially important to shift the spotlight from the survivor to perpetrator, and all the blaming and shaming and hate should go towards them, towards perpetrator, of course. And yeah, I would say that the last point from my side would be to revise our attitude towards women and to reconsider discrimination in society.
Thank you so much, Anna. Already in those opening remarks, you raised so many important issues, and we'll come back to quite a few of those in the discussion, I hope. I'd like to now move on to Iryna. Iryna, you've been speaking about your own experience and that of other women since your release from captivity. You've been traveling around the world and talking really bravely about all of these issues. Please share some of the key messages that you'd like us to hear from you, and perhaps also maybe some of the stories of other women too.
Я колись була жителькою Донецька, який вже майже 9 років окупований Росією. І Росія прийшла в 2014 році в мій регіон як переможниця. Була проведена така дуже агресивна пропаганда серед населення. Населенню мого регіону було обіцяно, що вони будуть просто так мати високі зарплати в 4 рази більше, що вони будуть мати бензин, який буде коштувати копійки. І світ навкруги мене просто зійшов з розуму. Я не розуміла, як можна вірити в подібні речі. Наприклад, я вирішила з декількома жінками возити їжу і якийсь змінний одяг українським військовим, які стояли десь 10 кілометрів від міста. Мабуть, тоді я не розуміла всієї жорстокості Росії і чим це для мене закінчиться. Вони заарештували, їх було десь 10 озброєних людей. Вони розмовляли російською мовою, вони прийшли просто у мій будинок, вдягли мені на голову мішок і вивезли мене в свій батальйон. Мабуть, найстрашнішим було те, що допомоги не було від кого чекати. Ще вчора я була самодостатньою людиною, яка подорожувала по світу, мала будинок, тварин. І в одну хвилину я стала просто нічим. Я пережила 5 дуже страшних діб, і я мусила загинути, бо вони мені це сказали. Але я, мабуть, дуже людина з великою вдачею. На 4-й день полону їм вже набридло наді мною знущатися, і я була повністю зломлена. Я вже не була людиною взагалі, і не була рослиною, я вже не знаю, ким я була. І вони це як шоу зробили, вони вивезли мене на площу Донецька, написали, що я вбиваю дітей, і що я пособниця фашистів і карателів, і призивали всіх місцевих людей мене бити. Але я мала, як я сказала, я мала вдачу. На той площі, я не знаю, звідки був журналіст New York Times, і він зробив декілька знімків. І він надіслав ці фото в New York Times, і через добу це фото було багато де, і різні феміністичні організації, вони надали ноту протесту. І це врятувало мені життя. Я можу сказати, що наші історії жінок, які тоді на Донбасі в цю остру фазу в 2014 році страждали, вони в чомусь всі однакові. Аліса є режисер-документаліст. І, можливо, вона могла би залишатися в безпечному регіоні, але вона професіонал, і вона вважала, що в ці важкі часи вона мусить бути разом зі своєю країною. І вона з вільної території заїжджала в Донецьк для того, щоб знімати, документувати те, що коїлось в Донецьку. Беззахисність жінок в ті часи і наглість, і безнаказаність росіян, вона була просто жахлива. Забрати дівчину, режисера-документаліста в сексуальне рабство – це було нормально для російського офіцера. Ви бачите і мене, і Алісу тут завдяки тому, що ми, мабуть, дуже щасливі люди. Бо небагатьом жінкам, які потрапили в ту ж ситуацію, що і ми, тоді вдалося вижити. І коли через декілька років, коли я отямилась від пережитого, без жодної допомоги від держави, в суспільстві, яке робило вигляд, що нічого цього не було, я відшукувала цих жінок, і я казала їм, якщо ви всі будете мовчати, то це ніколи не закінчиться. І ніхто про це не узнає, ніхто не буде розуміти, що коїть російська армія. І ми з вами, ті, хто вижив, ми відповідальні за тих, хто не був таким вдачливим і закопан там, на той території, яка 9 років вже окупована Росією. І, на жаль, я мушу відверто сказати, що держава в цьому ніяк не допомагала. І зібрати цих жінок, об'єднати їх в якусь групу, яка готова говорити і давати свідчення, нам допомогла фундація Деніса Муквегі, і ми стали однією невеликою частинкою великої організації Сема Нетворк. Ми побачили жінок, які пережили не менші страждання, ніж ми, але вони відкрито про це говорять. І це було, я вам скажу, новий досвід. Ми багато чому навчилися в Семані Нетворк. І коли сталася ця нова хвиля агресії, так, якась кількість наших жінок поїхала з країни, бо вони просто не витримали цього жаху вдруге. Але велика кількість залишилась, ми зібралися духом і сказали, що ми тут для того, щоб допомагати новим постраждалим. І після деокупації Київщини я багато їздила по цим селам, які місяць були під цими жахами російських, які були під окупацією російських військових. І люди розповідали мені дуже різні речі. Люди знають, що сусідку зґвалтували. Люди знають, що зґвалтована була жінка на іншій вулиці. Але коли я намагалася, наприклад, з деякими цими постраждалими встановити контакт, ці жінки казали, я не хочу нічого розповідати. Я пережила страшний жах в своєму житті. І нащо мені ще раз це розповідати і згадувати? Але були жінки, які сказали, Боже, це так добре, що ви нас підтримали, і що ви є. І ці жінки, вони приєдналися до нашої організації, але ніхто з цих жінок не надав свідчення прокуратурі. І поки що вони не бажають цього робити. Дякую вам за увагу. Я відкрита і готова відповісти на всі питання. І я хочу, щоб Аліса розповіла своє бачення цієї ситуації, бо ми різні генерації.
Ірино, дякую. Дуже дякую за цю розповідь таку відверту. Thank you so much, Iryna. It really shows also how important it is to keep these keep these stories visible, audible, talk about them, and what international community and the intention of the international community can do, what kind of pressure can apply, as is really evident from that one photograph that we got to see in the West, and obviously respond to it. So we'll come back to this question of visibility, I think, and also, how all of us can do something, because what you were saying, what do we do about it to stop it, but also raise awareness and so on. Well, actually, that leads me to a question I wanted to ask you, Alisa. You're a filmmaker. You were making films about the war as well. You were spreading the word about it, awareness about it already, but you made a different choice in February. You decided to put your camera down and to pick up a weapon. And tell us a little bit about that choice, how that transformation came about, and what it's been like since February for you.
It's like this story has a long background actually, so I will try to be very short. So of course when Maidan Revolution started, we as documentary filmmakers, we were still students, but we felt that we have to film it for sure, for history, for to have this document, but of course we were also participants of the revolution. Because we wanted to have our civil society, we believed in European values and etc. So we filmed a lot during Maidan Revolution, and when everything started, Crimea, Donbass, of course, I felt that I have to go there because it was kind of continuation of what was happening in our country. That's why I went to Donbass, and I tried to film a bit in Donbass, but it was incredibly complicated for me, Ukrainian. There I needed to have accreditation, but we knew that no one Ukrainian journalist could receive accreditation from separatists. And of course, it's a moment I was thinking, okay, what I could do, what I could film. And I filmed a bit next to this demonstration of separatists, and after I understood that it's too dangerous, so I went to the position of Ukrainian army, and I stayed there and I filmed the really first soldiers, Ukrainian soldiers, who started this fight in 2014. And one time I was on the way back to Donetsk because this checkpoint was surrounded completely by separatist checkpoints. So we were in the middle and you have to cross lots of separatist checkpoints to go there. It was in between Slavyansk and Kramatorsk, if you know. And on the way back, I was stopped by separatists on the checkpoint, and the taxi driver, because at the time it was impossible to drive a bus, nothing was working. Public transport stopped working, and taxi driver said immediately to the separatists that she's with Ukrainian army. And of course, separatists took me from the car, and they started to check what I have, beat my legs, and they were saying, she's a sniper, for sure she's a sniper, she's not crying, I know they prepared for it, it's his Nazi sniper, and of course after that I was immediately brought to interrogation and administration office, and the head of interrogation, it was kind of officer, the main officer of контрразведка.
Counterintelligence.
Counterintelligence, yeah. He said, I'm Grom, I'm head of counterintelligence service, and I'm going to make you speak up. And so that's how it started. And I knew actually lots of information about positions of Ukrainian army. So I was trying to make this puzzle in my mind. What I can say is that they believe that I'm saying kind of true, but to say like to lie. And I couldn't speak for a long time because I really tried to put like to make it logical my fake story, or to say some fake information. And they were promising me that they will start to cut my fingers, my ears, and like everything. And it was like long. It was a really long interrogation. I don't know, 5-6 hours. At the moment, I completely lost time. It finished very late. It was already night, and this Russian officer brought me to apartment. And he said that he wants to save me because, if he will put me in the basement, tomorrow separatists will just kill me. And he forced me to undress myself, and he was like enjoying a lot that he has this power and I can do nothing. Actually, he even put his gun in front of me at the table. I was sitting just in a towel because he forced me to take out all clothes and put them in the bathroom. It's like super weird, and he was sitting next to me, putting his gun on the table, cleaning his gun, and just enjoying that I can do nothing, that I even cannot kill him, because what I could do without documents, and I have to cross 6 checkpoints, so I couldn't even run from this place. After this, I was released. After 4 days. Actually, also some luckiness helped me because I was there in Donetsk together with my boyfriend, French journalist, and I knew lots of French journalists there, and all French journalists knew that I'm in captivity. So actually, this Russian guy and other separatists, they were afraid to kill me, or because it could create lots of problems for them. And finally they released me, they let me go, and this Russian officer said that actually he let me go, and it was he saved my life because actually they supposed to kill me. Because for them I was for sure Nazi sniper, etc. After this, it was very complicated for me to talk about all this experience. What Iryna mentioned with lots of women, that actually it's really complicated to talk about this. And also when you start to talk, you feel that you're weak. Even when you understand that in this situation you could do nothing, but you feel yourself so weak that you start to feel also shame about this. And it's really complicated to talk about this kind of things. After this, I understood that I have to continue to film. It became even more important for me. So after I went to the front line in Pierson and Donetsk airport, and I filmed volunteer fighters there. And it's exactly at that time I gave promise to myself that if this war will grow and it will become a full-scale war, I will put my camera down and I will fight. Because, camera always creates this kind of distance between you and reality. And for me it was very complicated to live with this distance. I really wanted to participate. Sometimes you doubt if really cinema can help, if really documentary filmmaking is still important when you are at the places and front line. And it's exactly what happened later in February 24. I was in Donbass. I was together with the characters of my upcoming documentary about teenagers from the frontline zones. I was together with my characters, with my camera, and I felt that I cannot film anymore. I felt completely weak as a documentary director. I started to think how I could help my characters, evacuate them, because we were living just on the front line, just, 1-2 kilometers from the it was border with the already occupied territories, Lugansk region. I was thinking how I could help my family, how it could help my country, other people. So I decided, okay, I first helped my characters. I evacuated one girl who was 17 years old and was sitting under bombing, and her small village was already occupied. I helped her, and together with my friend, we evacuated her to the Polish border. After I decided that I will go to fight, and that's how I went to the front line together with Ukrainian volunteer army, because in военкомат, military, like official military officers, they said if you don't have military tickets, if you didn't serve before in the army, you now it's first wave, so you should wait for third wave. That's why I could only go to Ukrainian volunteer army, where everybody who wants could fight. Actually, we were doing the same things together with the regular army, just we didn't have money, no insurance, and if you have no leg, okay, it's your problem, and that's it. But the rest, we were doing the same things. And there are many people like me. Some people had military experience, some even didn't have. There were some artists, some builders, there are two boys who are building ecological houses. So there are different people from different spheres. Some IT guys who could actually earn lots of money and live safety in Kiev, I don't know, or go abroad, but they decided to come to fight. And I spent 4 months on the front line. After our military base was bombed, our friend died there, and our unit stopped to exist in that moment. Lots of my friends from my unit, they signed a contract with the regular army, and they joined different units. That's it. And after my close friend died, we brought him to his small village in the Volyn region. It was a funeral ceremony, and after this funeral ceremony, I decided that I have to to rethink all this experience, what I went through, and also back to the editing of my film about teenagers from Donbass. Because at that time, already 3 of my characters, I had 5 characters, 5 teenagers, 3 were under Russian occupation. And with 2 of them, I lost contact. So I didn't have any information. I even didn't know if they're alive or no. And I understood that it's also important to to edit this film, not only for myself, but for these teenagers, for these kids who need to be the stories of who should be told.
And the film is now in post-production, and we should see it next year, is that right?
Yes.
So what's the title of the film?
Actually, the title was Expedition 49 because it was also about Himalayas, because these teenagers participated in a very special program. It's like adventure therapy program, and they went to the Himalayas. And it was the 49th expedition of one very famous Ukrainian explorer who was supposed to bring them to the Himalayas. That's why the title was Expedition 49. But the film changed a lot in the beginning, because it was 3 years. So I filmed for 3 years this film. It's much more about Donbass and how teenagers in Donbass can dream. Even when there is everything against these dreams, how they can fight for their dreams, how they illuminate this dark world around by the feeling of life, by the believing in realizing their dreams. And the end, the last part, this is actually Himalayas expedition. But after, war catched them and broke their dreams. So I was really feeling all the time that I'm making film about dreams who can become true. But actually, film became about shattered dreams, broken dreams. And when I come back to the editing, and I was watching this like rough cut she made, I couldn't watch it without crying. And I also realized that I actually the sense of the film completely changed. And I started to re-edit everything and like shape story in a different way. And now the title of the film is "We Will Not Fade Away." It's one lyric of one of our character, a boy from the small town in the front line. He was writing a song and one scene of the film, and he was saying, "I will not fade away." And we started to think that in all current situation, this is something so symbolic because it's about our dreams, who like Russians tried to take from us and try to take them fade away. And it's about us, our lights inside us, and it's even about like our electricity, because this is like what they want to do. They want us to fade away, and we will not.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Alisa. I really hope that the Ukrainian Institute in London will show this film as soon as it wins all the awards and film festivals like your previous films. I'm sure we will. Thank you all for sharing your thoughts, your findings, your stories. I have so many questions, but I will resist my temptation to ask them and open the floor straight away so you can ask your questions first. Any takers? Yes, Ursula, please.
Thank you very, very much for talking to us all. Can you tell us, Iryna, or maybe Apolline, if there is experience in Ukraine or elsewhere? Iryna, you told us about how women wanted to work with you and talk to you, but not go to court. And is there information or experience from elsewhere that says if women can share enough for a long enough time, then some of them are prepared to go to court later? What do we know about that? What do people want to do?
And maybe I could follow up quickly because that was one of the questions I also wanted to ask. There's no statute of limitations, right? When we talk about the prosecution of sexual violence, crimes of sexual violence in Ukraine, right? So maybe there's hope that even those who are under occupation now can actually come forward later when they are ready to speak about these crimes. So that's probably a question more to you, Anna, and you, Apolline.
Social start with
And maybe
experience
Iryna as
with
well.
women and
No, that's a very good question. So what we realized, at least in our experience at the Mukwege Foundation, is that it's much easier for victims to speak to a survivor. And you will see how I use the term victim and survivor. So where we differentiate it is for us survivors of people who have had access to the care they need to be reintegrated in society, and victims are the ones who haven't yet. And of course, we talked about stigma, we talked about the taboo around this issue. So for a victim, it's much easier to speak to a survivor because they know they're not going to be judged, right? And then this is a way of fighting underreporting. But at the end of the day, I think it's not so much about reporting to... It's about victims having access to the care they need to be rehabilitated. And that can take the form of justice, because I think very often what I've heard from many other countries where we work, justice and the fight against impunity is one of the most important things for victims. But it can also be about survivors who are part of survivor networks such as Sema Ukraine or other networks we worked with, just helping victims understand that, first of all, there is an after. Like having this strong, inspiring figure showing that this is not necessarily the end. But also that telling them about the care that is available to them, because very often they just don't know what's there, what's out there, and guiding them through this process. And it would be much... For a lot of people that I've worked for, a lot of the survivors I've worked with, it's much they trust much more a survivor telling them, okay, you should go to this hospital, than if it's like, for instance, a police who telling you that, or even someone working for an organization, like an NGO, you know. So I think that's a beauty of peer-to-peer support. That's a beauty of like how survivors can help other survivors and inspire each other.
Я можу додати, що навіть контакт з такими жінками, як я, він не є легким. І жінка, яка пережила це місяць тому, вона не йде просто так на контакт. І в мене був такий випадок, коли я декілька разів підходила, і потім я сказала, що я сама пережила те, що ти пережила, але я пережила це в 2014 році. І ця жінка, вона перестала бути агресивною. Вона якось пом'якчала. І потім я їй сказала, що мене не цікавить те, що, подробиці, я не прокурор, але я є представницею міжнародної організації, яка зібрала гроші на допомогу таким жінкам, як ти. І я хочу тобі сказати, що ти не одна в цьому житті, і що тобі допоможуть. І тоді цим жінкам стає дійсно трохи легше.
Yeah, I wanted to ask that according to international criminal law, this CRSV and violation of the rules of law doesn't have term.
Expiry date sort of
Something
thing.
like
Statute of
you can
limitations.
report 20 years and 30 years after. But in Ukraine, at the moment, it's not like that. And this is one of the amendments that needs to be done. Our criminal code must be aligned with international norms, because at the moment I think it's 8 years, and then it's like outdated, which is a problem because experience of other countries show that women start speaking years after these events, and sometimes really like 20 years after.
And also this is particularly relevant if we talk about temporarily occupied territories, because obviously, like Iryna was saying, parts of eastern Ukraine has been occupied for 9 years already. Please.
I have a question for Alisa, but actually would love to hear anybody's thoughts on it. And the question is about representation of sexual violence in conflict and what, I guess, kind of general reflection about what it means to be represented in sexual violence in times of conflict, either in documentary films or in feature films.
Actually, at the beginning, when some people started to contact me, I was the first person who was talking openly about sexual violence. The first, like really, and I felt it's like completely weird that how it can be that I'm alone, like completely alone. And for me, it's also happened spontaneously. My parents, my husband, my friends, nobody knew for more than 1 year what actually happened. So I was talking about some things, but I didn't talk about the most painful things. And one day I participated to one documentary theater, which was also kind of a therapy. It was like with displaced people from Donbass, and we started to talk about captivity, about my experience in captivity. And the director of the theater, he asked me, but maybe you should talk about your experience, and it's important to talk. And it was the first person whom I told this story. He was the first, and maybe because he was not from my family, and he was a very kind person, I knew him, I trust him, so I told him everything. And that's how we started to think about documentary theater, which will be part of the therapy, but also the way to talk about this trauma and like to talk with people about this. And after the theater performance, documentary performance, lots of NGOs started to contact us. That's actually how Iryna knew about me. Because of after this performance, I gave some interviews to some NGOs, some organizations about because I started to feel that it's actually important to document these crimes, what Russians did. But I was so surprised that there was only one person who was talking about this openly. For me, it was very, very complicated, and it was really tough experience in the theater performance. But on the other side, I felt that it's so important to talk. So maybe it could be a good example for others to talk. Okay, because people can see, okay, this woman can talk, then it can work as a domino effect. So that's why I felt and I rationalized kind of this thing, talking publicly about this, that it can be good for other women who feel free, who can feel free to talk. So for me, it's more like a mission that's important. And it's important that we could have all these crimes documented, because it's what we need. And now there are more and more and more. And I see that it's only maybe 1% documented, and there are not enough organizations, people, or state institutions who really go to the occupied village and interview people, just talk, psychologists, I don't know, NGOs. Really, I was in the occupied, it was next to Izum, one small village, and we were talking a lot with the kids. I was a military more there. But even children and teenagers, they were so open to us, and they were talking about everything what happened there. They just came to us, soldiers, and they were talking what happened, that Russians forced them to build checkpoints, that what this did, what they did to this woman, and I was, but where are the NGOs, where are the state institutions? And we asked these kids if they already gave this information to other institutions, and they said no, nobody came to ask. So, and I think it should be much more work, and with the people who can, like Iryna, for example, who know how to talk, who can really help these people to be open. Because if it will be police or it will never work. I couldn't imagine myself going to police. Hello, I want to report about rape in Donbass. But when it's somebody like Iryna or a good psychologist who come to talk with these women, I think it could work, and we will have a result of really documenting these crimes.
I wanted to ask about what we know about the extent to which these crimes are part of a kind of deliberate strategy, or to what extent they're encouraged or allowed within the Russian army. How far up the chain of command we can take it. Do we know anything about it? And also, when it comes to legal process, how difficult is it to establish this as a systematic crime that's carried out by the army rather than lots of individual crimes?
Знаєте, ми маємо дуже багато доказів того, що це стратегія. І ми відчули це не з СМІ, а ми бачимо це кожен день і кожен час, починаючи з 2014 року. Можливо, ви чули, це було у всіх СМІ, де перехоплена розмова по телефону російського військового і її жінки. Молода жінка молодим голосом каже йому: я тобі дозволяю гвалтувати українських жінок, але ти мусиш предохранятися. Те, що ми відчуваємо з 2014 року, і те, що ми зараз впевнились вже многократно, що, можливо, російська армія не має чіткої стратегії саме по гвалтуванню, але саме гвалтування є частиною стратегії повного знищення української нації. І в цьому кожна українка зараз переконалася в цьому на своїй шкурі. Просто повірте нам, ми відчуваємо це кожну секунду свого життя. Вони прийшли для того, щоб нас повністю знищити. А в якій формі? Гвалтуванням, ракетами, ножами, автоматами. Це вже не має такого значення.
Just add that it's like a sick Russian psychology to humiliate us and to make us to obey. It's really in their mind. You know, like in Russia, there's very high level of domestic violence. So in each, I think, third families, there is a man who was beating his children and wife. And it's like transmission. It's like constant transmission from one family, from children to their children. And in the philosophy, psychology, there is that if you beat your, for example, your child who is not obeying, and at some moment he will be suffered so much that he will say, okay, father, you are right. And it's exactly what really Russia wants to do, because they consider us like a child who is doing something wrong, who is going to Europe, but no, you have to be with us, because we need Kiev be controlled by us, we don't want you to go to Europe, we don't want you to have democracy, and they try to beat, humiliate, until they think we will say, oh yeah, like sorry, we were wrong, like we should be with you. And it's really, if you watch Russian TV, you see it in their propaganda. It's like Lavrov today said, we want to just like this denazification of the state, and after we will be so happy in our Slavic friendship. So they're really still like using these messages. So like I have my conclusion that they really have this sick psychology, that they want to beat, and they really think that at some moment we say, oh sorry, we were wrong, like we should be with you, Russia, dear friend, like I don't know. Yeah.
Я собі сказала, що в мене є всього два шляхи. Бути до кінця життя нещасною, зломленою, або змусити всіх і себе також стати щасливою і жити далі. І були різні періоди, коли мені це було легше, інколи мені було важче. А потім сталася ця масштабна агресія. І зараз я відчуваю, що я просто маленька краплинка в цьому морі жахіття, крові і болі, яка рухнула на мою країну. І я навіть, мені зараз соромно, що я тут жалюсь вам. Бо всі мої проблеми, вони стали отакими маленькими перед страхом, що я втрачу взагалі свою державу і Україну.
And I would I agree completely with Iryna, and it also was the same with my family. We never talked about this. It was like everybody understood, but we never talked. And but I also felt that maybe it's good that it's kind of protection, that they're not dive in this pain, and kind of. I was even relieved that we don't talk about it at some moment. Like some moment I was thinking that I needed to somehow like to talk, but after I felt that no. And I was always saying before this full-scale war that captivity and what happened to me was the strongest and the most terrible experience I ever had in my life. But with the beginning of this full-scale war, and with the death of my best friends, the closest people, I felt that I could go through this captivity 1 million times if it made alive my friends who died.
Yeah, maybe I would also like on a bit larger scale. There are no programs, systematic programs for work with families of survivors, and for several reasons. On the one hand, because there are no targeted programs for survivors, and then prioritizing if they want to do something with those who experienced it. And then another part effort goes on the work with law enforcement agencies who are investigating and contacting these people. And another thing is that I mentioned before is absolute lack of understanding of the situation of this crime and also of experience of people who had personal experience of war. Because, for example, in Ukraine now, many people are under occupation or were under occupation, or they live in very difficult conditions. And some part of the population is blaming them, is angry on them. Why didn't you evacuate, for example? Or why you were at the street at night? Or why did you talk to the Russian soldier? And I think there are some psychological reasons for this, like maybe protection or something, I don't know. But in the society in general, you can say that there is lack of understanding of experience of other people experiencing war.
Yeah, I think something that's also interesting and that we see in other countries is trying to understand why there are so many families and husbands that point blank reject their wives or their partners after they've been victim. And I think it's anchored, like anything, when we talk about sexual violence, you can't take out the fact that it's anchored in patriarchal norms and toxic masculinity. And very often, and maybe not so much in Ukraine, I don't know, but in many other countries where I worked in, when sexual violence is used as a weapon of war, it's used to systematically destroy the victim, but also the community around her, right? And so the way they do that, they do it in public, they do it in front of family members, for instance. And then what happened very often is that the men who were supposed to protect their wives or protect their daughters as per their place in society were not able to do that. And they're not able to handle the consequences of this, and they would rather reject their wives or partners than handle the consequences. And so I think there are some programs that exist out there where the idea is to shift the narrative, to understand that to actually be a strong man, to be there for your family, you need to be supportive. You need to be there. You need to understand that it will take a long time to recover. And that is a complete shift of mentalities. And to be honest, this is something we see in many, many, many countries around the world. But this is possible. There are some family therapies. There are ways of doing it. But I think it's, I've very often heard that, it's probably the second biggest trauma of a lot of survivors. The first one is rape itself. The second one is a rejection by the society and more closely to them, their families.